Hi, everyone. Hello. I guess this is the Meet the Devs? Ask the Devs? Meet the Devs and ask the Devs about Meet.
Or the game.
About the MLP the My Little Pony collectible card game. Who in this room has never played the My Little Pony collectible card game? Not even a demo. Who in this room has only gotten a demo, but then they're going to play more later? All right, so you're all ready to play the Gen Con Continentals next week, right? Or next month? All right, good. All right. We're ready. They're primed.
Excellent.
So what are we here for today, Adam?
So this was initially going to be just a question and answer session, but we figured we should probably have something to proactively talk about as well. So one of the things that we tend to get asked about is different aspects of design and development. And one of the things that we haven't really talked about with design and development is how designing for limited play, draft, and sealed is different from the focus in constructed, and what sort of things that has done to the design of the game and some of the impact that it's had on cards that we have designed in the last few sets as we've
Well, two steps back. One step back is limited play. Is that actually a slide on here? Defining limited play, really? It's
No.
Sealed and draft is our limited play selection so far. Sealed's where you sit down with a starter deck and a couple booster packs, or like 8 booster packs. Go through, make your own deck. Draft is the more complicated thing where you each bring, how many packs? 4?
It's 4 packs.
Everyone
for draft.
brings 4 packs, and you cycle cards around. You cycle packs around amongst each other, taking one card at a time, and you're carefully picking the cards that are going to hopefully be in your deck, but also hate drafting the cards that are going to make other people's decks awesome. And it's a whole other skill set on top of the normal skill set some people really, really love, and we're really trying to encourage people to try it out with our game now.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite ways to play almost any card game. There's a big aspect of reading the table and understanding the card pool and just determining what's good at your table, which is not necessarily what's good in the set, which is not necessarily what's good in any particular metagame. So it's a lot of fun.
If your brain is a spreadsheet, you're already like 2 steps ahead of everyone else. And speaking of steps, taking 2 steps back from where we start, we never actually said, this is Adam.
Yeah, hi.
And Adam is the lead designer on the game in the sense of a lead development. He is the one who makes sure that all the numbers on the cards and all that, like when you play this card, win the game, like those things. He's the one who makes sure that they are like good and stuff. And I'm the grammars. I'm the one who's like, this is Pinkie Pie, also does things. And then the flavor text is like, I like party fun. In other words, I take the 2 cost, 3 power, when this card enters play, draw 2 cards, and I turn it into Pinkie Pie surprise party planner, and add the flavor text to it, choose an appropriate image, and so forth.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of the division of roles, is the mechanics versus the theme and the flavor.
And I guess I didn't say my name's Rob or Cups, and he's Adam or Adam.
Either way.
So now what you were really talking about.
So there are a few focuses that limited design has that you don't really have to worry about as much if you're just designing for constructed. One of them is that the rarity of cards matters a lot more. You need to be able to have the right cards at the right rarity to be able to build a limited environment that is fun and interesting to play. You can't just have all the like cool stuff at rare or have a bunch of boring rares. You end up needing to actually toe the line on all of your rarities in a way that is a lot more demanding than what you are expected to do with constructed. Also, card density and distribution, you start having to care about a lot of other things like how many troublemakers there are in a booster pack and how many problems there are in a booster pack and how much fixing there is in a booster pack. If you look back at like set 1, like the premier set, there are enough cards in that set that are like your 0 requirement entry cards for you to build a constructed deck. But that's not necessarily the same as there being enough for you having to build a good limited deck, because you aren't guaranteed to get 2 or 3 copies of the same card in limited. So you end up having to focus a lot on that. Also, archetypes within the set. The set needs to be able to stand on its own. You need to be able to build decks that are fun using only cards in that set. It can't be like an adjunct set that only builds on something that comes from other sets. and your pool of blue or orange or pink cards in the set have to kind of have a theme and be building towards a deck, and there needs to be several different decks that you can build towards in limited. So a big part of managing your card density is assigning rarity correctly, because the rarity has a huge effect on how often cards show up in packs. So even if you have a given number of troublemakers, and you want to get the number that are in a pack correct, you need to figure out what the math is for the incidence per pack of troublemakers based on the rarity that you chose. So commons appear in packs about 2.5 times as often as uncommons. In limited play, almost 2/3 of any given pool is going to be uncommons, because your pool is just whatever you pull out of the pack. So that's going to be 7 or 8 uncommons, or 7 or 8 commons and 3 uncommons, and then 1 card that is a rare. So anytime you're working with limited, your cards are almost all going to be commons and uncommons. And your commons end up defining the backbone of your limited format. So you have cards like these, which sort of define what is going to be happening in a lot of your games in limited, in draft and sealed. You have stuff like a yellow deck that relies on having a lot of little friends running around the board, or things like powerful troublemakers that will help a control deck stabilize and come back from an early deficit, like the Twitter mites. Uncommons also appear pretty regularly. They're going to make up about 1/3 of your limited pools, and the goal with your uncommons is mostly to accent or complement your core of common cards. They need to be able to take what the common cards are trying to do and give you some sort of payoff for it, or something to build around with what those cards are doing. It's pretty common for your uncommons to be anchor cards that are going to define your archetype, where that's the card that you basically build your draft deck around. And those would look a little bit more like this. They are uncommon. They still show up in limited. They show up less than the commons do. You can pretty reliably get 1, maybe 2, especially in draft. And you have something like Little Strongheart, which might work with the Rise and Shine that I showed you a minute ago, because it rewards you for having a lot of little friends. Rise and Shine gives you a lot of little friends, so it's a pretty clean payoff. Similar, you have Limestone Pie, which rewards you for having troublemakers and is a good way to stack up behind a troublemaker, because every time they try to fight your troublemaker, you get to put counters on your guys. So the longer you can defend your troublemaker, the bigger your guys get. So you can back up a bank of common troublemakers with your anchor uncommon. Not all of your uncommons, though, are going to be anchor uncommons. You have a lot of other things happening in your uncommon slots. You have a lot of utility cards. You have a lot of removal. Some more niche things like Calvin and Theo, stuff that removes resources that you want to have available and limited, and make sure people can draft, but that people don't necessarily want or need to draft 2 or 3 copies of. And that's usually where you end up with your common slots. And commons are your uncommon slots. And your uncommons are actually under the most pressure of any of your slots most of the time. They get upward pressure from, you have commons that are too complex to be commons. One of the other focuses with your rarity is that you want your most common cards to be your simplest cards, because they're the ones that your players are going to see earliest and most often. So you end up, if you have something that's supposed to be a common and it ends up being too complicated, you might bump it up to uncommon. You also end up doing the same thing down from rare, though, where you have a card that is too simple to be a rare, too not exciting enough to be a rare, you bump it down to an uncommon. So you end up squeezing your uncommon slots pretty heavily. So it's getting the rarity right is a major challenge. You also have your rares and your super rares and ultra rares. They don't make up the bulk of your limited pools. They show up periodically. You're going to have usually 1 or 2 of them in a deck, especially in sealed, where you might not be. You'll open 8 rares, but you won't be able to play all of them. But because they're the big, exciting cards and they're often very powerful, they can have an outsized impact on the way the game plays. So you have cards like Thunder Lane and Photo Finish that are essentially bomb rares. If you're familiar with the phrase, they are able to take over the game. They influence the way the game plays out to such a degree that they really do need answers. Otherwise, the person who has them is going to be at a fairly significant advantage. You don't want all of your rares to be like that, but you do want some because it's part of the thing that makes opening packs exciting. It's part of the thing that makes people feel good about drafting into the right archetype or getting when they get past a good rare because the guy who's sitting next to them isn't playing blue. It's one of the things that helps give texture to the format and make sure that things are changed up and they don't play out the same way every time. Card density is one of the things that you're trying to manage with your rarity, and there's a lot of concerns with card density that are really important for our game, for Limited, that just weren't focuses prior to us needing to design around Limited. You need to make sure that your players can open enough color entry in their sealed pools that they can play a deck that requires entry and not be stuck all the time. It's particularly challenging because you need to make sure that you have all of the colors are going to have enough entry, because if you target only some of the colors having sufficient entry, you end up in a situation where a lot of your sealed deck building decisions are just based on what it is possible for you to play rather than what is good or exciting or fun to play.
Just in case your area doesn't, or just your group of friends don't really use that term, entry is for example, a 2-cost, 0 requirement 2 friend in orange gives you entry into orange.
Yeah, it's the things that don't have any color requirement attached to them, but that will unlock your other cards by giving you the requirement you need to play them.
And I'm blanking. What's the term for a card that only has 1 color requirement, so you can play it off your main? There's like a.
I don't know that we have a particular term for it, but it's a secondary entry that is more limited. Only really works as entry if you're running the main of the correct color. And one of the things that has pressured the way that we design cards when we're trying to be able to fit all of this entry into the set is that space is a major limiting factor. In a set like Equestrian Odysseys, a set of that size, you end up needing 4 or 5 entry cards in each color in order to be able to get to the density where you're going to have enough to build a good sealed deck. And if you are trying to build or design a set and you need 4 or 5 entry cards of each of your 6 colors, that ends up eating half your common slots, which is not really a tenable thing. It would make the format really boring. So it's not what you want to do. So you come up with designs that will allow you to get more entry into the set without eating as many slots. So you have something like Kevin that essentially functions as entry in every color. For Limited, when you open a Kevin, it doesn't really matter whether your sealed pool wants you to play an orange deck or a blue deck or a pink deck or a purple deck. Kevin is going to be entry into whatever color you're going to be playing. So you essentially fit what would otherwise require 6 slots into your set into 1 slot. And that's one of the driving factors behind the design of cards like Kevin.
And one of the nice things about, some of you might already know that cards are generally printed in an 11 by 11 grid of an uncut sheet, 121 cards. And for example, the set that Kevin was in had 40 commons. So you'd put 3 copies of each common on a 121 card sheet. 1 extra slot, Kevin's a perfect fit to be 1/3 more common than the rest of the commons. He makes Limited just plain better that way. So.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting to see how even though he was designed for Limited and his design was influenced by the need for Limited to have enough entry, he also then ended up having a pretty significant impact on Constructed as well. So this sort of design ends up causing your whole game to evolve, which is a good way to keep things interesting. You also have cards like this. Brayburn and the cycle of cards that he is in are another way for us to essentially condense our entry cards down and be able to print interesting cards and entry cards in the same slot without having to compromise the way that things are color enforced. So you have modal cards like Brayburn where he either will act as entry or as a card with an effect when you play him. And they also allow us to they don't do quite as much work with condensing the set as Kevin does, where he turns an entire 6-card cycle to 1 card, but they do essentially get you allow you to have 2 cards that exist in 1 slot, which is really helpful for getting us to the density of entry that is necessary for limited without eating up the whole set with a bunch of boring entry cards.
This is kind of an example of a card that, like, he'd almost would have been an uncommon, except for the fact that he was designed to be common in a common slot. He's like almost complicated enough where you're like, should this be uncommon? But he was designed for a purpose, so.
Yeah, your complexity concerns always flex a little bit based on what the card needs to be doing. Density matters for a lot of other things as well. You need to have, your players need to be able to get enough problems to build a problem deck, which is one of the reasons that we've moved towards having more colorless problems. It allows you to it enables the block format in Constructed, where you can build a functional block deck with just the first set of the block and have a legal problem deck. And it also helps with Limited, where if you have 3 or 4 colorless problems, you can make sure that people are able to build problem decks that are not just the vanilla problems that you can proxy, without having to devote 40 slots of your set to 4 or 5 problems of each color. You also need to be able to get enough troublemakers to play a defensive strategy. You need to be able to get enough events and resources to keep the game varied and interactive. So all of that stuff ends up giving you quotas for every kind of card, essentially, that you have to balance much more carefully when you're designing around Limited than when you're just designing a set for constructed play.
And I keep trying to make sure that we have chaos, if possible, on a cycle of uncommons. So, because you're playing Limited and all of a sudden chaos flips, you want that to happen more than once per like entire tournament,
Yeah, we've found for Limited that chaos has been, it's great for the game overall, we think, but has been really good for Limited for helping to keep the game changeable and allow people to come from behind and keep things from getting too predictable. So we do try to make sure that we get mechanics like that. It's one of the reasons that chaos became kind of an evergreen mechanic that we keep using. We want to make sure that we have effects like that in all of our Limited formats. And then set archetypes. So an archetype is basically a theme or a goal pursued by decks of a given color combination. They're important because they keep your decks from feeling the same and keep your games from feeling the same and playing out the same way every time. They often derive from color identity. They don't all have to. You can end up with tribal decks that are less color locked. But a set's archetypes for Limited need to be well defined and varied, because you want there to be a deck that you're drafting towards, where you're not just trying to get a pile of all the blue cards or a pile of all the pink cards. You want your decks to feel different. You want a blue-orange deck to feel different from a blue-white deck, which is different from a blue-purple deck. And ideally, one of the things that really makes especially a draft format interesting is if you can get multiple archetypes that overlap in the same colors, so that you have cards that are good in some decks of a color, but that aren't as good in other decks of the same color. Like these. They're narrow cards that really only work for particular plans. So they're great if you're in the archetype for them, and if you're not, they'll tend to get passed over in draft, which also means that the person who is in that archetype is able to pick up more of those cards and ends up being rewarded for being in their more narrow archetype. So that's really all we got for the slideshow.
So what I was thinking was, because it's, what time is it here? It's only 8:20, right? So before we go to Q&A, I thought if you guys were interested, we might have a little fun, kind of like a day in the life of a ponifier. That's kind of my job, is to take, like I said, something that costs 1 action token and, is an event, immediate, put 2 1-critter token friends into play. So just have like 5-10 minutes, just have fun. Like, anyone have an idea of, if this wasn't Rise and Shine with Fluttershy raising critters, what would have been another fun way for this to be a pony card that was 1 cost, yellow, and poof, there's 2 critters? Like, it could have been the Stampede of Animals when Fluttershy screamed at the gala. There's an example. What was that? You will love me. Yes. So what other scenes in the show had sudden animals? Go ahead. Yes. Oh, yep. Those battle snakes. Yeah, what's up? Oh, Bunny Stampede, even better, especially after Zootopia. That's true. Yeah, there was a couple duplicates. To be fair, I might not have actually used all of those on cards, but they're still fun. Everyone got the really bad jokes of like who Calvin and Theo are, right? Alvin, Simon, Theodore, Chap and Doyle, Chip and Dale. Who else would have been a? This got picked because it was a 2 cost, 2 power, and it was supposed to be a critter. That's what I was given: 2 cost, 2 power, critter, and dismiss a resource. So I was like, it would be fun if it was 2 little critters working together. But what other times in the show? Let's get off of critters after this. But what other time in the show have critters? We already had like an opalescence who destroys drapes, if I remember correctly, or fabric. What other times have animals in the show destroyed things? Again, the animal stampede at the gala. What's up? Oh, the scene where all the animals put Rainbow Dash in the freaking in the pot. That became a card called Fast Food. It was great. Thank you. What? Walk the pets? Fernando is not a pet. I'm getting text notes from the front audience. Any other critter destruction we can? Oh, what's up? Oh, yep. Oh, yeah. Who here thinks the Parasprites have been a little too much used in the game? Well, not since Premiere, huh? They've been a little bit less since Premiere. Premiere they were around like 9 cards or something. I don't know what I was doing. Now, okay, here's a great one. Here's a great one for flexibility. Food fight. Though I'll be honest, the main reason I use this is because that's the name of a really, 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 really bad movie. That's why it's spelled with 1 word and an exclamation mark. That's the exact title of it. That's the. But let's, pinky or otherwise. Pink, immediate, dismiss a friend.
A big one, specifically.
A big friend, specifically. What would be pink removal? Yoink. Okay, so Yoink was, but I mean new cards, new scenarios. Yoink was Pinky using a hook to pull Rainbow Dash away from Cheese Sandwich during the musical duet. What? Yeah. And the trees explode. Bark shrapnel everywhere. Other pink. What characters are pink? We got Pinky, we got DJ. Who else is, what? Cheese Sandwich, he's got a giant cannon. That dismisses friends, I think. Who else is, what was that? Lyron's usually pink. What has Lyra done that's gotten rid of characters? What was that? Oh yeah, oh no, wait, she got plowed into. When Pinky and Fluttershy Pinky and Twilight came flying into town, they ran into Minuet. And that's not even the character you were talking about. But that's a fun, I didn't doubt about that. That's a fun dismissal card, is Pinky and Twilight flying into the sky and just ramming into Minuet. All right. Yep, that is fair.
Hey, I got a question. So, I just wanted the episode with Discord at the gala with Fluttershy.
Yeah.
It makes that when he asks like some questions, she makes that amazing like face, which is like the kind of like how to answer this. I want that on a card. I don't know. I just wanted to didn't show up on a card that face.
I know what you're talking about. I can't really visualize it right now, but I'm sure oh yeah, she's just, yeah.
It's like just a straight line face, just like colon capitalized.
Noted. Yes.
I got a God pack, and
Okay.
And do you know anything about it? All I know is that it just comes with a bunch of super rares and ultra rares.
So we have what we call angel packs and god packs, depending on the set, and I couldn't tell you which one or which right now. But angel packs are all foils, and I think they're only from the first block, because there are no super rares at that point. We introduced super rares in block 2. So if you get a pack that is from an older set and it's all foils, but maybe an ultra rare, maybe not, that's an angel pack. If you open a pack where it's got multiple ultra rares or blah, 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 that's a god pack. And they're very, very rarely put inside of booster boxes. And then we, at the office, get like a sleeve, not like like a white card holder sleeve. We get like 40 of them,
Something like that.
60 of them that we use slowly over time or accidentally use way too many of it once.
As the case may be.
Oh, can you get microphone to that gentleman? Because we can go right to Q&A.
So a lot of times I see a card and I think like, yeah, this is a sideboard card in a game without sideboards. So has there ever been thought to try to put some sort of sideboards into this game, specifically after you would see their main, say you could see their main, then you could sideboard based on what the main is, kind of something unique to this game. And that way you could have sideboarding in a one-game match just based on what their main is.
So the main reason that we don't do sideboarding is the one-game matches. Our game is slower than a game like Magic. For us to do 3-game matches, we would probably end up with rounds that were 70 minutes or longer, which is a serious logistics challenge for a lot of stores and retailers. If you're talking about being able to like adjust your deck after you see their main, but before and still only have the one-game matches, that would help to resolve the time problem. The other big reason, though, that we don't do sideboards is complexity. It's another thing for a new player to have to learn to do and a new player to have to learn to adjust to. It's another hoop to be able to jump through to have a deck prepared for a tournament. And it's another way that another skill bar for people to be able to play at any reasonable level is just a whole new thing they'd have to learn is how to sideboard. It's another additional skill that's completely unrelated to the standard deck building and also separate from the actual playing of the game. And the other reason is that there's less need in our game the way that cards are distributed. The card economy is a little bit different from games like Magic. When you're playing Magic, you draw your 7-card starting hand, right? And you get a card every turn. But about 40% of those cards are going to be lands. They're not going to be active cards because that's the way that their resource system functions. We don't have those lands. And unlike something like Hearthstone, where they don't have the lands and you get a 3-card opening hand, we don't penalize the opening hand at all. So rather than a game of Magic where 4 turns in you've got 10 cards and hopefully 4 to 5 of those cards are lands and 5 to 6 are actual live cards. In our game you end up still with those 10 cards, but all 10 are live cards. So for you to have one that is potentially a sideboard card and might not be as relevant to you in your particular matchup is not going to make or break your game to nearly the same degree. Cards are just much more plentiful in our game because you don't have those dead land cards. It's why, for the most part, you don't see, if you play Magic, you'll see people who are empty-handed. They're top decking all the time. There are plenty of game states where both players have no cards in their hand and they're both just playing whatever they draw off the top. And in that situation, drawing your sideboard card is tantamount to a loss. And that situation just doesn't crop up nearly as much in our game, partly because you have the ability to draw cards with your actions whenever you want to, but mostly because you just have an additional 5 or 6 cards over the course of an average game over top of what you would get from Magic. You also have more deck slots relative to the deck economy in Magic. You only have 45 cards as opposed to 60, but a playset is 3 as opposed to 4, and you don't have to fit the lands. So in a Magic game, you're looking at usually 24 lands in a deck, and you can, if you're just running a real boilerplate simplified deck where you're just running playsets, you have room for 9 playsets of cards plus your lands. In our game, you have room for 15 playsets of cards. So your deck space is actually a lot less restricted, and your card economy is a lot less restricted. It's really just not as big of a penalty to be able to be playing those sideboard cards, which is why you see them in matches, right? Like we get the sideboard question almost every time we do one of these these panels, and when we first started getting asked about it, people would point to cards like the yellow key specifically, and say, this is a great card. It would be a great sideboard card, but nobody's ever going to play it in Constructed if there's only 1-game matches and no sideboards. But it turns out that gets played as a 1 or a 2 of in decks all the time. Mostly because it's just not, the sideboard cards are just not as penalized in our game. So it's tough when the penalty is so much smaller and it's so much easier to run those sideboard cards to justify the additional complexity of requiring players to do all of those extra steps and learn all those extra skills to be able to sideboard well against an opponent.
And it helps when you have a card like Calvin and Theo, which is when this card enters play, you may dismiss let's say an enchantment, but it's also a creature,
So entry is like sort of like lands. Like, I mean, nobody wants to play emerald green unless you need to get into blue. Like, you ever want to play that as your card?
Sure.
So it's not just much less of it. Like, we kind of changed our recent point. Basically, entry also does other things. Are you going to kind of do that direction, try to make entry cards that are more powerful, have other things besides just being entry?
Yeah, we think it's a better place to be in for the baseline power level for entry. Is even something like Emerald Green is still a live card. It's not nearly as good as most of the other cards in your deck, but it is still a body you can play to the board that can apply pressure. It's +2 power towards confronting or towards a face-off. So it's not a dead draw. It is an underwhelming draw. But we have decided over the course of the last block that in general we like the entry to be a little bit more impactful. That's why Kevin is sort of a baseline entry card for us now, and we do try to get entry that has some additional effect on it. It can be a little bit tough to do that all the time because you do want some of those effects to be color enforced, but you do want to have some sort of additional effect on your entry cards. That's something that we intend to continue doing as we go forward, the way that we design entry.
Do you want people to start lining up for questions now, or you still got more stuff?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
If that's
Awesome.
We'll
All
just
right.
go full Q&A, though. I think your mic is a little muffled at the moment.
Is it?
Does it sound okay to you guys?
Sounds good. You're
All right.
down here anyway.
You sound very low, deep though.
Like this?
All right. I mean, are there any questions? This guy likes to talk about math. I like to talk about horses.
I got one real quick.
What's
How
up?
do you guys determine when you ban a card for tournament? And is it a long, drawn-out process, or just feedback you get from the games?
Yeah, it's something that we end up talking about a lot before it actually happens. There are a number of criteria, and it's always a little bit of a process. But in general, you mostly, really the core requirement is that the card has to be making the game not fun. Usually, like, it can be because it's a power level problem where it's just winning every game that it's in, and we just have missed the mark. But more commonly, it's so far has been because they're enabling decks that are frustrating or counterintuitive to play against, things like the Globetrotter that was banned, stuff like that. They're not necessarily, even if the card itself isn't a power level problem on its own, the overarching concern is that it plays into a deck that is just really unfortunate to play against or has some problem with it, even aside from its actual power level, like the decks that those were in were just causing severe tournament delays, which just becomes untenable for us to deal with, even if it's not an overly powerful deck. So those are the sort of the primary concerns, and it's something that we basically look at tournament results and talk about within the rules team and the development team, and sort of come to a conclusion on over time, and then periodically do updates on.
And also, I just really hate Rainbow Shine.
People that want to ask questions, if you can line up here, we can get them going. Yeah.
Hello.
So, you mentioned the differences between all the other rarities.
Mm-hmm.
But what exactly is it that determines whether something is a rare, a super rare, or an ultra rare?
A few things. One of the overarching ones is just complexity. As I mentioned, basically the more complicated a card is, the harder it is to understand. The further up the rarity scale it moves. So ultra rares, the ultra rare slots sometimes are occupied by cards that are just doing something that is very strange that we don't necessarily want a new player to have to figure out as the first time he opens a pack. So you can never completely control whether or not he sees those cards at all, except by not making the card. But you can definitely tilt the scales pretty heavily by making it a card that he's less likely to open in his first 5 or 6 packs, so that by the time he sees it, he'll have had a little bit more of a grounding in the game and be a little bit more prepared to deal with it. Yes, things like that. Power level is also always a concern, although we do have, we have strong cards at every rarity, but it is more exciting for players when they open, they open like a shiny foily super rare or ultra rare, and it's like also a really good powerful card that they were looking for. So we definitely try to make sure that those cards are exciting because they're strong. Sometimes it's card identity. Like we definitely set out periodically to say like this set needs, we haven't done an ultra rare Pinkie Pie yet or whatever, and we should definitely do one.
Or like we want a cycle of super rare blahs, we want a cycle of, amongst the block we want a cycle of ultra rare blah.
Yeah.
Yada yada.
So it's usually, there's several different factors, but it's usually a combination of those that ends up placing a card at rare or ultra rare. The difference between super rare and ultra rare is a little bit smaller, and that's, but it's still essentially just a gradient of the same progression. Especially when it comes to complexity, we really try to make sure that the complex stuff is as rare as possible. So.
And sometimes a card just becomes a rare, mostly because we want to make sure that we print a promo foil version of it. Just that is what it is. Next question.
So, how much do you look into the community feedback when you make future cards and future sets and stuff like that?
It's something we keep track of relatively closely. We definitely, I read through feedback that we get through Facebook and feedback that we get on like the subreddit and like public venues like that. It's definitely something we keep in mind whenever we're making a decision, whether it's a ban list decision or a development decision or things like that. It's, when it comes to tournament feedback especially, we look at tournament results and trends in tournament results. And we really, the overarching goal is to make a game that is fun and that people enjoy and that our players are having fun with. So it's definitely, we want to make sure that if we have a bunch of players who are unhappy about something or telling us that something is bad, that it's something that we take a look at and make sure that it's where we want it and that it's not causing problems.
Does that count flavor decisions too? Like, if we complained about the fact that there's only 3 rarity ultra rares, loud enough?
Does it count flavor decisions too?
Yeah. I mean, I actually recently considered opening a thread on Hey Canterbot, just outright saying like, all right, what have we missed, or what has only been on one card so far, or like
Rainbow Shine.
What?
Yeah.
We should make a Rainbow Shine for set 8 that we can immediately ban on day 1.
Sure.
It'll be like 0 costs. You can retire this Rainbow Shine for 3 action tokens.
We'll just reprint the same one.
What?
We'll just reprint the same one. Yeah.
Get what? Get Swifty? What? No, I actually didn't hear you. Yes. When you draw a card, get an AT. We need a resource that's like when a player's deck empties, they lose the game.
There you go.
Yes.
We've got a few, but it's mostly within Orange's wheel, and half the time Orange would rather mill itself than your opponent. But yeah, well, most of those effects are not all of them, but most of them are either player. you just end up wanting to choose yourself because orange gets to do stuff with its graveyard.
It is kind of the way our game works, it's kind of an uninteractive. It can be very uninteractive to be having an alternate win condition of milling, So
Yeah, it's a little bit rough to try and have too many effects that encourage you to mill your opponent when they don't lose when they mill. You end up just being like, well, we're going to continue to play this game, but it's mostly just going to be me playing, which is definitely fun for half the people at the table, but not necessarily something we want to encourage too prominently.
But we do like alternate win conditions, just innately. It's really hard to make them.
They're
right.
definitely always a development challenge.
What's up?
There you go.
I came late to the panel, sorry we addressed this, and sorry if you don't actually know this term, but within the My Little Pony card game, how are you guys trying to prevent like power creep within your card game?
Prevent?
Power creep.
It's something that we try to pay attention to. You have things like a rotating format like block do help, where you can, the thing that always causes power creep more than anything else is that for a game to stay interesting, the new set has to change the way things play. And you need to have new decks arise and new decks become good and new cards that people want to go get and play. And the shortest distance or the shortest path to making that happen is just to make things that are more powerful than what is currently out there. So it's always a challenge to try to design in such a way that you are creating new options that aren't necessarily overwriting old options or invalidating them, and especially not doing it by just creating a better version of the same card.
Is that why
But
most card games have rotations to
That is one of the major benefits to rotation is that it allows you to you don't have to make like the better version of Rarity Truly Outrageous in order to get people to stop playing Rarity Truly Outrageous and play the new card. That card will just go away on its own, and then you can have other cards that are similar in function and similar in power level, but are different and new that people can play. Right, yeah, just like a little bit outrageous.
Pretty outrageous.
But it's something that we pay attention to, we try to avoid, and there's, rotation is a tool to do that. One of the other tools that we have are to try and open up new archetypes or to open up tribal archetypes or something that is an easy way to try and do that sort of thing. Or just decks that are doing something different and not necessarily doing the same thing better. That said, there are also occasions where we have made cards that are just better versions of old cards, which is, one of the things that the old lead developer liked to say was that it's not power creep if you make a better version of a card that nobody plays. Which is, sometimes we do miss the mark. What we mentioned a little bit earlier with entry, where the older entry is a little bit boring. People played it, but it was mostly because you had to. So we print entry now that is generally more powerful than what the entry was at the start of the game. But that's not necessarily a case of power creep so much as it is a case of printing cards that are playably good that replace the cards that were just bad. Yeah.
That was a rare back in the day. 404.
Yeah. So it's something that we pay attention to and try have a number of tools in our arsenal to try and manage. But it is an ongoing development challenge to be able to design a game that feels fresh and rotates and it feels new without just invalidating older options by creeping your power up and up forever.
But a question about time limits.
Okay.
With the new rule change, I personally have, in my tournament stuff that I've done, had lots of issue where like over half of games go to time. I'm just wondering because this was mostly before dilemmas, so I'm wondering if you guys feel that that's going to change a lot, or if it's going to be a problem, or.
It's something that we're keeping an eye on, definitely. When we were testing with Set 7, with the dilemmas and the rules change, what we were finding was actually that the games often went a little bit faster because one of the reasons for the rules change without that we got rid of the first confront was that it made the game states stagnate a lot because it created this kind of counterintuitive situation where forcing a face-off was not beneficial to you and could allow your opponent to get. You could end up in a situation where you would force a face-off and it would benefit your opponent more than you, even if you won the face-off. So you would end up with these sort of stagnant game states where both players were kind of playing chicken and trying not to force a face-off.
Yep.
And you never want a game where it's in nobody's interest to advance the board. So by removing that first confront, you do take some points out of the equation. At the same time, it is also now almost always in the active player's benefit, to the benefit of the active player, for him to force a face-off if he can. And as a result, people end up forcing a lot more face-offs. You end up scoring a lot more points through face-offs and aggressing the board much more. You have a lot more people who are double confronting where they would have single confronted in order to avoid a double face-off. And what we've found is that tends to counteract the loss of points from the first confront, and then the gain of points from more double confronts and more face-offs has balanced out pretty well and hasn't caused the game to slow down. But I have heard a few people saying that they found the game to be a little bit slower, and it's something that we are monitoring as we as we run tournaments, especially here and at Gen Con, where we're on site to actually see it ourselves. Yeah. And if it ends up, if we find that games have gotten too slow, it may be something that can be corrected through development. And if not, it's something that we can correct just by adjusting the time limits. It's something that's that's an option that's on our table. It's just we don't want to jump to doing that. But it's something we're keeping an eye on.
Based on your current estimates, do you think the game should be 45-minute matches? Is that your sweet spot? What's your personal sweet spot? Would you try 40 and see how it works for a quarter?
As from perspective of actually running tournaments, no. We already don't have enough time. But as a player, 35 or 40, I feel a lot more games would finish. But I would say that we don't have enough experience yet with Marks and Time to actually definitively say that. So, cool. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
It also depends on how time is measured, because if you count 30 minutes from the time the first active building is laid down, is different from when you move that start time and everyone shuffles their decks.
Yeah.
Depends who goes first, and then they spend 10 minutes setting up.
Yeah, it's true.
Shouldn't be taking 10 minutes to shuffle up. Yeah, to you. I actually had the exact same question. I'll just plus one that and say that even though a lot of games don't finish, they seem to be very close to finishing, frustratingly close. If we just had 2 more turns, this would be a natural conclusion. So I think even just moving to 35 minutes would be a big positive change in letting a large percentage of games go to a natural finish. Moving on from that, small suggestion: when you make problems, double-sided, 6 and the 9, they're confusing. They're very confusing for me. And other people. Can you put a line underneath the proper side, things like that, to make it clear what is the 6 and what is the 9?
I'll do my best. I don't actually do the typography in InDesign. That's the software we use for layouts and stuff. Yeah. But I think I can probably brute force that in, and then it just will be there.
Yeah. Seems like a fairly easy fix, but I know I've lost games because of that. I'm like, what do you mean you're complaining? That's a 9. No, that's a 6. Anyway, and
yes.
Yeah, last one question. The new second chance problem, the one that gives you an extra action token if you go second, was there any thought to just making that a game rule instead of a problem? Just because right now going first is basically strictly better. So is there any thought?
It's something that people have brought up in the past. It's not something we spent too much time looking into. We definitely considered it, but what we've seen so far is that while going first is an advantage, it's not a large advantage, and ultimately going first is an advantage in almost every game to some degree, and it's really, really hard to get to adjust something like that with so much granularity that you get it to where it's exactly 50-50. So we haven't felt like going first has been such an advantage that it's something that needs to be corrected like that. It is something that we sort of keep an eye on an ongoing basis, but the data that we have has suggested that it's a 3 or a 4% advantage, which is relatively normal for being the active player.
My question is, what kind of playtesting goes into safetying the cards before they're banned? Because I noticed most of the banned cards, like bulk biceps or the errated fancy pants, are things that essentially cause themselves to go off, or have type, when X happens, do Y, and then when Y happens, do X, like magical mailbox. And I don't know if that's, that's kind of a mathematical thing. If you can notice that one card's effect will always cause another card's effect to cause the first card's effect.
Yeah, we have a series of playtesting teams who help us test the sets. Some of the people who have been on those teams are in the room, but they, in addition to the testing that we do internally, what they do is they basically get the cards as we're developing the set. We release playtest versions of the cards in waves. They get those cards and play games with them. Sometimes they play and test whatever they want. Sometimes we give them a particular task. For example, in Block 2, we spend a fair amount of time testing limited. We give them, the commons and the uncommons first and have them play with those in a limited environment to make sure that those formats are where we want them. So the sort of the testing you're asking about is something that we do, and it does catch a number of the things that might have otherwise gotten printed that are problematic. But some things do always slip through. And it's something that we constantly work to improve so that we have as few cards on the ban list as possible. But almost any Eternal format is going to require a ban list of some size at some point.
I guess my question is, it seems like it's something that could be like almost computerized. If you have an effect that causes itself, for example, like in the biceps.
Possibly, but we don't have we're a pretty small company, and we don't have anybody we don't have a playtest programmer necessarily on staff. It would be definitely cool to be able to have a tool like that, but it's not something that's really within our means, unfortunately.
Fancy.
Yeah. I was actually looking at Vault and Discord, and I found problems with them, just not those specific problems. So sometimes when you're so focused on one thing,
Yeah, there's so many moving parts in a CCG. You're looking not only at this point our game has we're over 1,000 cards now, I believe. We're at like 1,200 cards. And you're dealing with not just the 1,200 different cards, but all of the interactions between those 1,200 cards and the other 1,200 cards, and the combos or the interactions that you might have to watch out for just explode outward very quickly. Especially when you get into like 3-card combos, it can be real hard to catch the exact configuration. Even with a 2-card combo and across 1,200 cards, you're dealing with a million or more interactions, and you can focus down pretty well and only focus on the ones that there's a number that don't interact in any way that is meaningful, but you still end up with a number of possible triggers where you're like, well, this might be a problem, but here are all the cards that might be issues with it, and you end up coming up with a list of like 20, 25 cards and deciding that none of those cards actually present problems, but you missed 2 or something and one of the 2 that you missed was actually a problem. It's just so that
sounds fair. That sounds like a good process.
Yeah. But we definitely do everything we can to try and keep cards like that from getting to print, and we have one of the ways that we do that is try and get a number of different eyes on them, which is why we have several remote teams who all look at the cards and provide reports independently. So hopefully, if one group misses a card, another group will catch it, but sometimes all the groups miss the card and it goes to print, and we end up having to do something about it.
And let me just say, we made a resource card. We called it Magical Mailbox, and it's literally Spike pissed off that he's being called a magical mailbox, and then we had to ban it. This makes me so salty.
Rob was real upset about it.
I love that card. It's like, bleh. I'm not a mailbox. Yes, you are.
Right. So I know
She was going to. She was plotting our demise.
So I know that there's like a lot of limited creativity you have to do in a card game because just like cards interacting with other cards, that's suddenly broken.
Mm-hmm.
But like you banned Rainbow Shine, and like the note was that I see your smile. You banned Rainbow Shine because you said that it would like
limit future development space.
Yeah, like limit all that. Has that like happened with other cards or?
It's something that happens somewhat regularly with other cards. Usually not the same card over and over and over again, the way it was happening with Rainbow Shine. But there have been a number of cards where we have a cool idea and it looks like a fun card, and we send it out to the playtesters, and it comes back like, hey, this card and this other, like this card is really cool, but with this card that already exists, it completely breaks everything. We end up just not having to not print that card at all because or change the design to the point that it does something different because of cards that already exist. So yeah, that's a limiter that occurs all the time. Or we come up with a cool idea, but it requires too much additional complexity, or requires a rule to change, or there are a number of considerations like that end up causing a card that gets designed to not actually see print.
When do you decide to, when you make new mechanics, how do you decide what color it goes into, and when do you decide to shift a mechanic from one color to another? For an example, Vision of the Future was pink, and then we had Star Swirl Research in purple.
Yeah, so one of the things that has sort of changed with the way that we designed the game from when it went from set one is that we try to make sure that a lot of mechanics are in more than one color. You want the colors to be different and to feel different, and not for every color to be able to do everything. At the same time, if each thing in the game is something that can only be done by one color, your colors become very, very narrow. So we tried to get to the point where the keywords especially were in 2, sometimes 3 colors. Rather than only in one, because it creates a lot more space for us to design fun cards, and it creates a lot more space for you guys to build cool decks. One of the ways that we decide which mechanics go into which colors is just a question of which colors want the mechanics and what the colors are trying to do. Competitive is something that appears in blue and orange because blue and orange in general are interested in going out and starting face-offs and fighting people, so they get the thing that makes them good at doing that. Whereas something like Eccentric is aimed more at stopping confronts and slowing your opponent down, so that appears in the colors that are more prone to want to do that, like pink and white and purple.
Yellow.
Yeah, and in yellow occasionally. So you have colors like yellow that sort of switch around too, where they something like blue very primarily appears in aggro decks. A color like yellow has a lot more ability to switch back and forth between being an aggro color or a control color based on just the mechanical space that it has. So something like the example like Star Swirl Research is that mechanic is still in pink, but it's also something that purple can do as a result of the fact that purple gets cool face-off tricks. Purple likes to have events, and one of the ways that you can use events to tilt a face-off in your favor is with an effect like that. And purple also gets to set the top of its deck, so you kind of get to the point where purple could do everything that surrounded that kind of card, but couldn't do that actual effect, and there was just no reason to keep purple from doing that thing when it can do every part of that thing, just so that pink would be the only color doing that.
And you can come up and talk with Adam. I mean, you can talk with Adam at the Crystal Arena. Let's get one more question, because I think we have to stop in like 30 seconds. Yeah, so lightning round.
Quick. So you mentioned like the benefits of rotating formats. I agree. Are you planning to do anything to like actually like promote block more in high-level player, whatever, or maybe a standard format with the next block? Because personally, I'd like to see the mistakes premier block burned in a fire and just move on to the Odyssey block, which is much better design, in my opinion.
We're going to try to have a revolving pattern of store championships and regional championships using block, limited, and harmony to encourage all sorts of deck creation and more limited play.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we support rotating formats like block, but we also want to make sure that we're not leaving the players who like an eternal format like harmony out in the cold. So we try to support both. For the most part, we have so far kept the Continentals to be Harmony. We do have this year the initial sort of last chance qualifier round of the Continentals is going to be block before you get to the actual Continental Swiss on Friday that is Harmony. We also, as Rob mentioned, we're going to start trying to do some more organized play stuff that is specifically uses the block format, and have a rotation, especially with the regionals and store champs, between block, Harmony, and sealed or draft limited formats. So it's something we want to try and expand a little bit more into our higher level OP. You know, as it is, if you like block, make sure your store knows so that they can run block events on a weekly basis, or I'll switch back and forth every other week. But we will definitely be trying to expand the degree to which we support rotating formats without undermining the fact that we also want to support our eternal formats. It's something that we've talked about, but it's we definitely have to get to the point where we have more blocks before we're early enough in the game. Yeah, we're it's something we've talked about. We haven't made any solid decisions on it, on whether it's something we want to do or when we would do that if it became something we wanted to do. But it's definitely something that we've talked about as we've gone through designing set 8.
All right.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. We appreciate we appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. If you haven't already visited the Crystal Arena, please feel free to do so. We'll be running events there all weekend. And if you are interested in playing in the championship tomorrow, that is going to start at 10 a.m. We'll start taking registration at 9. So. Yes, Crystal Arena is like way down the hall, like way down the hall.
Hub left wall, go around
room
the corner.
339, I believe.